This is Peter Helland on the show Israel. I'm going to look at Sirach, chapter 38, verse 24. The wisdom of the scribe depends on the opportunity of leisure. Only the one who has little business can become wise. Then it talks about people who make their living as a potter or a farmer or a blacksmith. He said they're important. They maintain the fabric of the world, and their concern is for the exercise of their trade. But how different the one who devotes himself to the study of the law of the Most High. He seeks out the wisdom of all the ancients and is concerned with prophecies. He preserves the sayings of the famous and penetrates the subtleties of parables. He seeks out the hidden meanings of proverbs and is at home with the obscurities of parables. So a culture is only going to survive if there's wise men and there's men that have leisure to pursue God. And America is American people are famously called worker bees around the world. At least that's what I keep hearing. That we just work, and then we entertain ourselves. But there's very little pursuit of wisdom, so we just really never know where we came from or where we're going. And all of a sudden, we live in a time where, it looks like the communists and the Marxists are going to take over. We don't know where it's going to go. And people are going, well, where did this come from? Who knows where to start? The Southerners, Southern theologians, Thornwell, Dabney, Palmer, they were pretty consistent. They said they were up against communists and atheists. That's how they described the North. The Yankees were communist and atheist. It doesn't look like they were wrong. Where did all these communists come from? They're just overflowing. I mean, we had Pete Buttigieg right here in South Bend, our mayor. His dad was a department head. Usually, to be a department head, you have to written 5 or 10 significant books. He had a dissertation. That was about it. How did he get that? And he was a radical Gramscian communist. And when I was at Notre Dame, a couple of years before I started, I think the person of honor that they honor somebody every year, I think it was J. Edgar Hoover. So Notre Dame was a bastion to fight communism, and then you turn around, and now it's promoting communism. How does this happen so easy? Well, you kind of have to strip the onion away. You have to get down and figure out what is communism, or terms like that, because they end up having no meaning after a while. No one knows what you mean. But you can look at the fundamental family unit. This country was founded on, supposedly, that you could argue, on the principles of John Locke. And it wasn't his treatises on government that was most significant, according to Gordon S. Wood, professor at Brown. It was his instructions on how to run a family that was revolutionary. Now, I know 1969, 70, I started school at Notre Dame in 70, I'm 18. And everybody was reading. What were they reading? 69. My cousins. Summerhill. Bernie Sanders. Oh yeah, Bernie Sanders just loved Summerhill. Well, what's Summerhill? What was that? Radical democracy. Children should call their parents by the first name. It was radical democracy. That was what was being pushed in the 60s. So what we have out here, you have all the millennials a large percentage were raised on these principles that the parents picked up. It was Dr. Spock on steroids. My mom had Dr. Spock's book right by her bedside to guide her in how to raise us. He was a radical, probably a Jewish fellow. He came to Notre Dame one time, and I asked him if he believed in the resurrection of Christ. He didn't know what to do with that. Well, he was a radical liberal. But my mom still came from conservative roots, so she only took his teaching so far. But the next generation, the 60s, Spock on steroids. Their children were born angels. They could do no wrong. They weren't born with a sinful nature, so such that you need to train up those children and put them into boot camp till they're 18. That was the old way. Why? Because they're sinful. And your job is to instruct them and be on them like a commander, like a sergeant over his troops. Why? You have to. That was thrown out. Now they're raised, everything they do is angelic. They can't do anything wrong, no matter what they do. Well, that's raised up a bunch of communists because they have no respect for authority. They don't believe in sin. They believe anything they do is right. If they feel like doing it, it must be right, because that's how their parents from the 60s tended to regard it. No. Maybe half the parents did not do it that way, but we had enough doing it that now we have a problem on our hands. And at the same time, I witnessed it. Now, somebody been asking for me to give them my story, how growing up in that. But I could give my story, and you can see how I saw it happening. So I'm from Wisconsin Dells, and Wisconsin, supposedly, Wisconsin's biggest industry is tourism, and the Dells is supposedly the number one place for tourism. And my family was at the center of it. And I'm the oldest male, so I got to see things from different perspectives. That's my dad's side. And my mom's side, her uncle was the head of the chemistry warfare division, which oversaw the Manhattan Project, from what I know. And her dad was supposedly even more successful. So I had all this perspective to see things from. But my interest at a young age was theology, to see it from a theological perspective. So out of 8th grade, I'm enrolled in the seminary near Madison, Holy Name Seminary, and I back off because the place seemed way too strange for me. I wasn't used to that kind of strangeness, and I said, I'll just wait. And supposedly, there was a lot of trouble going on in the seminary there in 1966. So some people think I escaped a bullet, but we don't know. 1970, I go to Notre Dame, and right before I go to Notre Dame, I had my sister's friend in her class. She graduated in 68, and so this girl, she was a neighbor for us in the summer a couple times, and I knew her from high school, band, but she, along with Armstrong and another guy, drove up that truck near the Army Research Building, downtown Madison, and they blew that up. And there was a guy in there that died, and that caused the student revolt to subside. Now, what did I know about the revolt? Well, the Dells was a center where everybody would hang out, and it would be, in the summer, you'd go out to the certain bars, and they would be packed. And I generally knew a lot, even from all the surrounding cities. So there was one guy that I knew, and he was the top basketball player in Boston, Wisconsin, a guy named Bob Smart. And it's packed out in these places, but that's where everybody talked. That's where he exchanged ideas. And he was at Madison, and he told me, revolution is right around the corner. He said, get ready for revolution. Now, I didn't really know what he meant, but I knew enough that I didn't know how it would unfold, but this guy was real smart. His name was Bob Smart, and one of their best basketball players, so you really looked up to those guys at that time, and so I thought, wow, I better get ready. So I'm at Notre Dame, no girls, so I really, basically, I had to go there because of the family tradition, and partly because, I'm not going to any party school. So Notre Dame was not a party school. There was no girls. And immediately the priests are teaching me evolution. They give you the class, evolution. And then I had 3 times a week all year, B.F. Skinner, behavioristic psychology. And then I'm learning German, and that's sending me to a certain worldview. I never read the Bible. Catholics at that time very rarely read the Bible, so we didn't have any Christian books in the home. So this is what I'm getting for my worldview. And after that year, I'm going to go overseas, study in Innsbruck, Austria. But before I went, my mom talked me into taking a philosophy class in the summer by a professor who actually was from our hometown. He just kind of came in from Oxford, England, to teach this class on philosophy. Well, he explains to the class. My mom had a lot of her friends in the class. A lot of it was for adults. And he explained how he was an atheist and he had studied it and he didn't believe there was a God. And everybody's going along with it because he was so smart, they said. And he got me thinking. I'm sitting next to my mom. He got me thinking. And I go, yeah, I told myself, when you really think about it, B.F. Skinner, the priest teaching me evolution, we come from a monkey, he's really putting that in your head. I guess there is no, you have to say there is no God based on this information. Well, that was a huge mistake, but I did follow it. And I'm just thinking, well, this is the wisdom I'm getting, I got to follow it. And then the professor introduced me to Friedrich Nietzsche. So I'm reading all into Nietzsche. And then I'm over in Austria, in Germany for a year, reading Nietzsche. And the Germans are pretty well fallen away. Austrians are too. So I'm really picking up the revolutionary mindset. And there's supposed to be a revolution anyway. Picking up the revolutionary mindset. I come back, spend another year at Notre Dame, and now I'm really off in the deep end. Really, Nietzsche called it the abyss. Well, that's what I'm aiming at. And then I'm so distraught. I couldn't figure out. I was always used to knowing what I believed. Every morning I'd get up, say the Apostles' Creed, and I knew exactly what I believed. But now everything's gone. So I'm staying up all night on the Wisconsin River, trying to figure out what's true, trying to figure it out. So I'm on the riverbank, on the rocky, on the cliff, looking over, and as the sun came up, I had the answer. Everything just came to Jesus Christ, came right to Jesus Christ. And then I knew, well, God, there's nothing higher than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is what the term God is. I knew that. Just knew it. So I decided right then I'm going to quit Notre Dame because that's where I lost Jesus, and I'm going to pursue him. And got permission from my dad to live on a hunting farm we had right outside the city. I brought my books. I said, I'm just going to start where I left off. So I have Schopenhauer, World and Idea, because that's who Nietzsche drew off of, and I knew it. So I said, I'm going to backtrack. Now I'm going to backtrack. So Nietzsche drew off of Schopenhauer. I'm going to study him. And I'm out there on the farm all by myself. And my dad was, of course, obviously furious that I decided to quit Notre Dame, come out of nowhere. And you got to understand, Notre Dame most people go to Notre Dame just to say they went to Notre Dame. They don't go there to get serious about the material. There's very few intellectual discussions that go on there. But I didn't go there. No, I knew about the football. My high school coach, football coach, we were co-champions my senior year. My football coach actually wanted me to go out for football at Notre Dame. On one level, yeah, that's what I'm into, but obviously I'm so small, it was basically a joke. But I determined I didn't care about Notre Dame football, even in the slightest, didn't care at all. I was not going to let my attention go there. I was going to pursue the wisdom that I'm being given there and see where it goes. So I'm on the fast track. I mean, I'm getting onto Friedrich Nietzsche, boom, by the end of my, before my sophomore year. I'm not playing around. And then following Nietzsche, I'm looking at the abyss. And by the grace of God, in fact, right at that time where I stayed all night and came back to Christ in my thinking, I had a dream. I can't remember exactly, but it was right about this time. And the dream has me looking over this road that was packed full of people, and they are just going down this road, just thousands of people just going down this road, and the road is turning, and they don't know that as that road turns, they hit a cliff, and they're just dropping. Now, looking back, they're dropping into hell, basically. And I thought I was observing. I'm watching this like I'm a reporter, and I'm not part of it. Well, there is no such thing as somebody being a reporter and you're not part of it. No. The truth was, I catch myself, and all of a sudden, I am falling off down into the cliff, just like all of them. And as I'm falling off the cliff down, I grab up, and I'm holding on to something, and then these two, like very young Oriental girls, grab my hands and lift me up. Very young, like 12 years old or something. They pick me up, basically angels. And now I can no longer be the reporter. I can't be just, accumulating data. Now I gotta look straight into that crowd and go into the middle of it and escape damnation. Now, I knew that from the dream. I knew that's what it meant. Even though I had never read the Bible, I heard some sermons, and I was reading Nietzsche, so I was far away from the gospel. But I put it together that is what was actually happening, because I was going into hell, and if I didn't go fight against it, the whole current of mankind would take me down there. So I knew that to be true. And so when I dropped out, eventually I'm at that hunting farm, but by the time Thanksgiving, like right about this time of year, it was getting too cold. And so I did stay out there during the hunting season, because we always hunted. That's what it was there for. And after that, then I moved back home, and then I would go to Mass every morning. Well, see, the thing was, reading Schopenhauer, I noticed that Schopenhauer was sympathetic to the Gospels. He said he wrote something favorable to the Gospel, which Nietzsche would never do. And I'm going, oh, that's interesting. Why is Schopenhauer saying something favorable to the Gospel? Like there was some truth there. Nietzsche would never want to acknowledge there was any truth there. So I'm going, oh, so Nietzsche come to that conclusion, and I'm trying to study Nietzsche, and now I see he's wrong. Now I have evidence he's wrong from his own master, Schopenhauer. So anyway, I go back, and so I'm going to Mass every morning, and then I meet all these people, and I start going to prayer groups, and I ended up in a Baptist church. They said, oh no, the best place is to go to this Baptist church. Okay, I'm just following every lead possible. Because in my mind, the battle is really over belief in God, which is only found in Christ, or not. And either you believe in evolution or you believe in special creation. That's where I saw that was the divide. Notre Dame, this is the 100th anniversary of Father John Zahm, the biggest intellectual to come out of Notre Dame in a way. And Zahm despised special creation. And he caused Notre Dame to fully embrace theistic evolution. And Zahm says you cannot have a research university and believe in special creation. You just can't. So by the time I was at Notre Dame, it was pure evolution, and the priests were totally teaching evolution, and then just saying, well, my priest, Father Murphy, I don't even remember saying that God was behind it. It was just pure evolution. And when you're a freshman, and then you get B.F. Skinner, psychology and all that, the devil's going to use that, and you've never read a Christian book in your life, and you're not around anybody contesting it. Let me tell you, you see how that's happening, and that is what's happening. And that's why you have, they said, 1/3 of all millennials identify as LGBTQ. I just saw that study. I think it was out of Arizona. And between the ages of 18 and 24, 39% of those people identify as LGBTQ. Now, don't know what it means to identify as LGBTQ. I mean, people, you can just observe them, the younger people, and you can just, you can see, you know what you see. But they were raised by 60s parents, generally, and they had a worldview that basically, in a lot of cases, denied original sin, denied that those children are born evil, with a strong tendency to evil, and they need parents to direct them and to chastise them and discourage them, and all those biblical terms, to raise them properly. That has gone to create what 2 Peter calls they are brute beasts made only to be taken and destroyed. They're like brute beasts, only to be taken and destroyed. They've lost all, their conscience is seared, and they've lost all sense of sin in the fear of God. Because if you believe in evolution, then you can't say the Apostles' Creed. You can't say the first sentence of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. When I grew up, I said that I'd get on my knees every night and morning. Remember, that's just all I ever did. And I really believed it. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Now, I didn't know the Bible, so I really didn't know the six-day creation that well. But when the priest is now teaching me, I came from the monkey over millions and billions of years, I couldn't honestly say, I couldn't believe both. I couldn't believe the Apostles' Creed, the first statement, and what he was teaching. So I put the Apostles' Creed on the shelf because I didn't have time to try to resolve that conflict. You can't go with both. So I said, well, I'm going to go with the evolution and see where it takes me. Well, it took me to Nietzsche, and it took me to the abyss, and thank God, the angels of God delivered me, and I found salvation back in Christ. But I was not going to go back to Notre Dame. So I looked to find, I got recommended all the time, well, you need to go to a Bible college. So I'd visit around. I went down to, one time I drove down with a girl to Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, Covenant College. They had Gordon Clark. He was almost dying, and he was like a professor. They said, and so I sat in on his class. He's famous, this philosopher, Clark. And he battled Billy Graham. He was at the college that Billy Graham went to, I'm trying to think, it's famous college. You got Taylor University, and then you have, I should know. Now, I have a little bit of excuse. I just had that COVID about 3 weeks ago, and so you come out of this, and they say you get a little brain fog. But it's the college that Billy Graham went. Can't believe I can't remember it, but Clark was there with Thiessen, and when I went to went to a couple Bible colleges, I used Thiessen's textbook, and Clark was battling Thiessen at the college, and Thiessen was a Christian Zionist, dispensationalist, a follower of C.I. Scofield, and that's what Billy Graham studied under. And everything around me, places I was recommended to go, well, go to this church, go to this Bible college, it was all C.I. Scofield. Clark was a Presbyterian, and they had condemned it as heresy as a Presbyterian church. They were totally against it, but I wasn't aware back then, not until I studied it. So what happened was the Dells, Wisconsin Dells, they all of a sudden, the Campus Crusade for Christ came there to do ministry, and I met the head of it, and he said at the same time that they came to the Dells, they also set up Campus Crusade for Christ at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, of course, taught evolution at every point, and I knew that was the enemy, and I didn't want to get around it. It was just 100% toxic to me to be around anybody that believes that and promotes that. I said, get me out of here. Because to me, that's the foundation for communism, Marxism, the whole thing. It's all, evolution is the key to all that. Everything's by chance. There is no, God is not directly creating and intervening, because you can't have both. You can't have God doing that and then you believe in evolution. Evolution, by definition, is an undirected, by chance, flow of things. All by chance, undirected, just all accidental. So that's how we got here, and that's how we're to proceed. So basically, how are you supposed to make a decision? Just make it by chance. Anything other than pure chance, it can't be natural. I mean, that's how anybody would conclude if you took it serious. So I decided, well, instead of going to Bible college, I'll go to Notre Dame. They got Campus Crusade for Christ. There's a place that believes in creation. They believe, the basics. So that's what I did. Came back to Notre Dame, graduated, and I ended up majoring in German because I had all these credits that I could use for German. Up to that time, I was majoring in psychology. Now, let me bring out a story of psychology. Now, this story opened my eyes to how so evil our system is. Okay, now, it's evil that they were promoting a revolution at Madison. I picked it up. It's evil that all the teaching put me on that path of revolution with Nietzsche and atheism and evolution. But when I told my dad I wanted to quit Notre Dame and live on the hunting farm, right out, not too far from the city, probably 6 miles, 7 miles, he was mad. And he said, I had to see a psychiatrist. Because that summer, well, first of all, I'm trying to study Friedrich Nietzsche. So obviously I used to, all into church, reading the Apostles' Creed. So, Dad saw that my thinking is changing. So he's kind of concerned. And I'm hanging out with whosoever. I mean, this is 1970, so you had all of a sudden the sudden influx of drugs. I had Indian friends that are taking some weird drugs. You know, they're levitating. You know, they're doing whatever. And I'm around it. Now, I personally couldn't stand the drugs. I didn't like them. But I'm around it. And so my dad didn't understand. And one thing that worked against me, I got my pilot's license. And you write in after my, how'd this go? Well, I think after my senior year. So I'm getting my pilot's license, and you write in the logbook, and people are drinking like crazy. This is the Wisconsin Dells. I had a cousin he was drunk every night that summer. And he didn't remember the night before. I mean, that's how much they were drinking. Well, I'd go out every once in a while. And so one night we did get drunk, and I wrote in the logbook that I was stoned. Well, those who lived back then, there was a period of time that instead of saying you were drunk, you would say you're stoned. Well, my dad found it a year or two later or something, and he just figured I was high on drugs. So he got that label, which if that's what he wanted to do, I didn't care. What happened was when I quit Notre Dame after my junior year, my dad said, to live out that farm, I had to see a psychiatrist. Now, I'm thinking, this could be a trap. But I go, well, I'm majoring in psychology at that moment. After my junior year, that's what I was majoring in. By accident, I mean, they gave me all these classes, and when I was over in Austria, they had these psychology classes. So, I mean, it's put in my lap. So I said, okay, since I'm majoring in it, it'll be interesting to see. Okay, then I'll actually see. I'll be confronting the practical side of psychology. I'll go to a psychiatrist. So I said, okay. Now my dad said the psychiatrist they found for me was the best in the state of Wisconsin, because my mom they had great connections. Okay, so they found a doctor friend of my mom, which I knew, recommended, said, this guy's the best. Now, who was he? Dr. Hahn in Madison. You could probably look him up. And he was from Poland and Jewish, which at that time meant nothing to me. I mean, my mom, you know, my family had a lot of Jewish connections. So, but I kind of knew that psychiatry had a Jewish kind of origin, just from my studies. So I had to go to him every week. That was my rent. That was the condition. In order to stay out there at that farm by myself, doing whatever I wanted, my dad said, here's the condition. You got to be seeing this psychiatrist. So every Wednesday, I go to Madison, and he was, in my mind, and still in my mind, completely worthless. Never asked any normal question. He had a toupee. You know, he had that, not toupee, he had that goatee. And he almost had like the black, I can't remember exactly it right now, black wall with the red couch. I mean, it was pure psychoanalysis kind of stuff. But he would never ask a normal question. So during this time, so this in September. I don't know when I went to, maybe the end of February. So when it got too cold, I moved back to my parents' house. I'm staying there. And I'm going to Mass every morning, and I'm meeting all these people. So finally he asked a normal question. The question was, what were you thinking about this week? Excellent question, normal question. That's what everybody should ask. What else would you ask? So I said, and I knew it could be trouble, because I was majoring in psychology, behavioristic psychology, which is similar to where this guy was from. And I said, well, I'm thinking about God. Now, up till this time, he'd almost always say, oh, Peter, you're getting better. And I would walk out of the room just rolling my eyes. You're getting better. I feel you're getting better. So I'm just doing super, getting better. But when I said, I'm thinking about God. I remember precisely, he did an about face in his posture, in his tone, and he had already gone, now I can't remember how many times, I know it was once, I kind of pictured it was twice. During this time, he flew to Los Angeles for hypnotic conferences, hypnosis. He was big into hypnosis. He'd go to these big conferences, hypnosis. Now, if he was all into hypnosis, now he never put me under any hypnosis, but this is the kind of witchcraft, kind of sorcery, kind of psychology he was into. And when I said God, he got closer to me. He looked right at me in this deep Polish accent. He said, Peter, I fear you are having a fantasy and you are entering into psychosis. And I go to myself, I said, whoa, I'm having a fantasy and I'm entering into psychosis. I said, I thought this could trigger something. And don't forget, in the Soviet Union, under communism, the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church said they killed about 100 million people in the Soviet Union. A lot of it because they had faith. And you were forbidden to believe in God in any fashion at all, and they would send you to the mental hospital and put you on Thorazine like in a heartbeat. That's what they would do. Well, guess what this doctor, Dr. Hahn, I fear you're having a fantasy, you're entering your psychosis. He says, I'm going to have to put you on medication, and if that doesn't work, you're going to have to go to the mental hospital. He said that all in one sweep, just like that. And I'm going, And then he says, I'm going to call your parents in next week. And I go, So I go back. I would drive there by myself. I would go back home. I go back to the prayer group because I had a nice prayer group with a lot of ladies. And I told them, I need you to pray for me for the next meeting. Because first of all, I was trying to be an atheist like him, because that was the training I was getting, to be exactly like him, to believe there was no God. And thank God I pulled out of it. And I don't trust myself. I don't trust his hypnosis powers. So I said, I need prayer. So I have all these people praying for me. And then when I go, my parents come with me. Now my parents are very smart. They have a very high IQ. They're very well read. But they believed Dr. Hahn is the best psychiatrist in Wisconsin. And whatever comes off his mouth is God's word to them. So he says that I'm slipping back, like Christianity, you're backsliding. Well, in his, I'm slipping back, and I'm going to have to go on medication. And if that doesn't work, I got to go to the mental hospital. That's what he told them. And they're going, okay, out of nowhere. I'm doing better and better every week. And when I said I'm thinking about God, boom, he went there, grabbed my parents, said, this is what's got to happen. And the hypnosis didn't work by the grace of God. And I just got up right then when he said that. I said, Dr. Hahn, thank you for your help, but I don't believe I need your services anymore. And I just took authority and walked out. And normally my dad always takes authority, but in that case, it was like he just followed me right out. It was like, boom, I couldn't believe it. Now my dad said, no, you got to see another one. And I ended up getting a group psychiatrist, and that's a story in itself. In fact, that one was so bad, I had a girl from church. I said, no, I got to have a witness to this. And I could go on stories on that, but she did come to the meeting because I had to have a witness, because this guy was really bizarre. And eventually I was done with him, and I was freed from that. But psychiatry was powerful back then. That's 1973, and bizarre. And that's how much power they had. And if I didn't have those people praying, I could have got sucked into the hypnosis. I could have got sucked in. They'd put me on medication. It could be Thorazine, a psychotropic. Then you go into the mental hospital. I'd be a victim of what they happened in the Soviet Union by the millions. And what did that teach me? Well, it showed me how unbelievably spiritually evil America is. Just total evil. How could that happen? Well, it did happen. Well, hold it. We thought that was only in the Soviet Union. Well, it almost happened to me right here. So when we look out and we see Marxism taking over all the campuses, we see Notre Dame being a bastion of anti-communism, and then in one generation promoting communism. That means that the foundation of this American experiment, there isn't one. There is no foundation. A foundation means Christ, standing on the Word of God. If you say you're a conservative, well, there can only be one definition of conservative. You're trying to conserve the main truth, the gospel. You're trying to contend for the faith once delivered, like it says in Jude. Or you're not a conservative. You're playing games with the Word. And so this country does not have a foundation. Jesus said, whatever your house is, country, family, is not founded on my word, when the storms come, your house will collapse. And we have a constitution that militantly, always has militantly, refused to acknowledge God. Now, there's some people that say, well, it says in the year of our Lord. That has never been considered an acknowledgement of God. And probably the strongest statement of Christianity, doctrinally, is Romans chapter 1. That's always been considered the foundational teachings of Christianity, founded right there by St. Paul. And it says, because they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. I don't even know if that's exactly how it's said, but it might as well get it exactly. Romans chapter 1. Because we're looking at where is this crazy Marxism, how did it get in so easily and cause all this trouble? Romans chapter 1, verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So that is what it says. And so we don't like our courts, our system. Texas versus Lawrence said no law can be passed if it's founded on religion. So it's illegal to pass a law coming out of God's law. That's a Supreme Court decision. Look it up, Texas versus Lawrence. It's illegal for Congress anywhere to pass a law based on the law, because there's only one lawgiver in James. God is the lawgiver. All law has to... Here's what we say. Well, if it's not according to the Constitution, it's ipso facto no law. Nobody can claim they're passing a law, and if it's not in conformity to the Constitution, it is no law. No, that's what we say. That's our law. That's the Supreme Court decision. Everything, if it's not in harmony with the Constitution, it's by our own creeds, it's not a law. So eventually somebody challenges it, goes to the Supreme Court, and they say that law, it's not legit because it's got to conform to the Constitution. Well, the Constitution can be interpreted any way they want, and they do. But the truth is, all law comes from God. And to say we have a law that says you must support same-sex marriage, well, that can't be called law. All law has to agree with the Ten Commandments and the teachings of Christ. Or it can't be called law. There's not like two sets of laws. That's called cognitive dissonance. You can't be functioning on two different sets. Which puts a great burden on a lawyer, puts a huge burden on a lawyer, because he is now called to support one set of laws, which are basically passed by people with money. If you got money, you can get any law you want passed. So the love of money and the power of money is the opposite of God's law, and you have two competing systems like crazy. So if you're a lawyer, you have to support the system that's against God. How do you reconcile this? How do you justify it? How does your brain deal with this? It's a huge problem. And so what else did I learn journeying through? So I graduated from Notre Dame in German, even though in a strange way, languages are my worst. It just so happened that's just what I majored in. And I ended up getting a master's in theology. I started out at Notre Dame, but to get my master's, but they said I didn't have an open mind to the critical method. And that basically was, I had Josephine Ford, who was a world, in Pauline epistles, she was a world-renowned Greek scholar and, one of the best teachers. But I asked her in class, I said, well, did Jesus and the apostles, did they believe in special creation? Did they teach according to what Genesis says literally? And she said, yes, they did. And I said, well, how come we don't teach that now? Because Notre Dame was all evolution. I said, why don't we teach that now? She said, we know more now than they did then. We know more now than at Jesus' time. So Jesus and the apostles were limited to their primitive view of science, but now we know through science that they were wrong. Now, are you going to tell me that's not a ton of arrogance? See, and they knew that I held to special creation, even though I didn't like trumpet it in the class. So what happened? I got good grades. After like 4 classes, like 12 credits, they have to make a decision if I'm in the program or not. And they said I didn't have an open mind to the critical method. So I was rejected. And then I just stayed and got my master's at Bethel University in town. Which, ironically, Bethel only taught special creation. In fact, they had one teacher that was teaching similar to Notre Dame, theistic evolution. Bethel had to fire him, said, you're out of here. We are not going to tolerate that. So I mean, people think, is the battle between, is it between Protestants and Catholics? To me, what's really going on out there, it's either evolution or special creation. Because the Marxist, one takes you this path, and one takes you another path. The universities are either your evolution or your special creation. You see that at Bethel, only special creation. They know that's where the battle line is. And Notre Dame, only evolution. Because during World War II, they say, the Navy took over Notre Dame. My dad graduated, he started there in 39, graduated in 43, and I think they only had 2,500 students. My dad got in Notre Dame with D's and F's out of high school. D's and F's. And he got in. As long as you had the money, you're in. Now, it just so happens my dad is very smart. So he was able to buckle down and do well. I don't think people that get D's and F's today, first of all, they'd never get into Notre Dame, and if they did, they wouldn't make it. But that's just how it was. And supposedly Navy saved them. My dad did get into the Navy. He flew Corsairs. He was a fighter pilot. His brother was a fighter pilot. Graduated in 39 from Notre Dame. It was the Navy program. And what do we see at Notre Dame now? Defense contracts like you can't believe. I mean, they're connected to the defense like no man's business. Somebody just told me they were involved in the Manhattan Projects. I don't know. He worked at Notre Dame for a long time. He said, yeah, they were. So I've never personally seen it. But that's what you got going. You have these universities. You have an educational system that's totally tied to this government. And what did the Southerners theologians say the Yankees were? Communist. How about Brennan? He's the head of the CIA. Isn't he a Muslim and a communist? I mean, look at the appointees of Biden. I mean, they're like openly like a communist Marxist type person. In other words, people who deny the law of God. But like I said, if you're a lawyer and you have to uphold these laws, which are now just being passed by billionaires, they can maneuver the system and get their law, any kind of law they want passed. And then look at the Supreme Court. Do they got the courage to uphold even the right principles if you can find them out of the Constitution? No, they cave in. They're cowards. When the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation, when they pick these guys, do they have a category? Are they courageous? If you go by the Bible, if you look Book of Sirach, it says, do not be a judge unless you have courage to take on the powerful. They will threaten your life. They're going to threaten to kill you. Well, if you don't have the courage to just not flinch when they threaten to kill you, you cannot be a judge, period. Why are they putting people up there as judges who don't have the courage of martyrdom? They have to have the courage of martyrdom, or they can't be there. Well, why are they there? Because these places that recommend these people. They don't even have a category for courage. They don't even understand the category. And yet, fear is directing all their decisions. I mean, the blindness that's over this thing is overwhelming. I graduate from Notre Dame. I get involved in South Bend. To go back home, the Dells is all business. So if I go back home, I'm going to say, to my dad, what would God have us do? What would God have us do? That is not going to go anywhere. That is not how businessmen, my dad's a lawyer, but he's also really big into business, tourist business. They don't, entertainment, they don't want that question. What would God have us do? Jesus said you can't serve two masters. Either you love one or hate the other, cling to one or despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon. I was going to be unmovable. I'm going to say, no, what's God want us to do? That's it. And whatever we can discern God wants us to do, how to do it, that's what we must do. And I'm not going to budge. Well, that's going to be a big problem. So I end up staying in South Bend. The first thing that I hear that I should do is, why don't you substitute teach? Because I'm not going to get married. I'm going to be like St. Paul, unmarried. John the Baptist, Jesus, they didn't marry. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be worrying about girls. I mean, those guys didn't worry about girls. Just going to be totally focused. So I didn't need to make much money. Substitute teach. You make $30 a day. Well, that was enough. I could make it. So I did substitute teach, and then I ended up getting a 9-to-5 job for about 5 years. I had other people recommending, I want you to do that. But anyway, I went back to substitute teaching. Fairly effective. I mean, I'd be on the school buses, I was in the schools, I was right there, so I knew the children really well. And, they would call me Bible man, and, So then one time, people from church, we made our own Jesus newspaper, and so we're passing them out at the various high schools. And then the high school that I taught at, I said, well, I'm not going to pass out those Jesus newspapers at that high school because that's where my dad was president of the school board all the way through when I was in school, and I knew the politics of this thing, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But the newspaper that we made had no names in it, but it had my name because I wrote a real big article on the history of public schools, how they started out with the Bible as the main textbook, and then how the Bible was taken out. Big, long. I quote Orestes Bronson. Orestes Bronson is buried at the Basilica at Notre Dame. And Lord Acton, over there in Europe, said the greatest American thinkers of the 19th century were John Calhoun and Orestes Bronson. Bronson was one of the greatest Catholic thinkers of the 19th century. And Bronson said, before he was converted to Christianity, to being Catholic, he said our mission was to destroy Christianity in the public schools as a transcendentalist. He was going to try to wipe out Christianity in the public schools. That's always been the goal. And I wrote that, and what happened was the Jewish teacher in charge of the yearbook at this John Adams High School in journalism lied and sent a note to the principal saying I was passing those newspapers out in the classroom, which was a 100% lie. I didn't even bring them into the school. I didn't even have them in the classroom. So I get fired from that school. What actually happened was the school board person over that school was the vice president, was the president of the Alumni Club at Notre Dame, and we used to have Bible studies with Young Life in his house. And he panicked, and he sent a letter to the personnel director, who I knew pretty well, and ordered and had him fire me. With no proof, just a lie, no investigation, so I'm lied. But they allowed me to stay in, teach at the other schools. So then, one day, I'm teaching art class at a grade school. The teacher complained that I brought a Bible in with me to the classroom. And they called me and said, well, you're terminated completely. This is after 8 years. I mean, over 700 times substitute teaching through all these years. They said, you're fired completely because a teacher saw you bring a Bible with you into the classroom. No, I didn't read it to the kids. I just had it with me, so if I had spare time, I could, browse through it. So I called them back. I said, well, can you put that in writing? Yeah, they wrote it, sent me a letter, fired for bringing a Bible with you in the classroom. Well, we took that. I took it. It was hard, very hard, because there was no lawyer to help you at all. I had to try to find, I tried Rutherford or Jay Sekulow. I found all these groups to see if they would help me. But eventually, we got it all the way to the Supreme Court. So that was 1993. We went to the Supreme Court in 1997. And I lost. However, I had a sister teaching American culture in Korea, and she decided to investigate what happened. And she said that for CNN News, I think it was January 7th, 1997. So CNN News for America, so that if you were a foreigner, if you weren't living in America, and you wanted to know, well, what was the top news item for America that day? CNN News had High Court turns down 2 First Amendment cases. And then they argued, described one. One was Westboro Baptist Church on a homosexual issue, and the other was my case. So the point is, I learned from that how evil our system is. And you have to come to realize that, how evil it is. And that's a short summary. This is the show. Our time is up. So hopefully that's that little summary there is helpful. So this is Peter Helland on the show Israel.